Over an 80-year lifespan, we watch 15 and a half years of television on average. 15 and a half years of having our brains liquefied and sodomized, zombified, and then glorifying products and nonsense. And that screws with us, because advertisements are assholes. They're assholes. Imagine if an advertisement were just a regular guy walking up to you on the street, just going, hey, hey you, hey, if you wore these jeans, then the hot girls would really do you. I mean like hot girls, not that ugly broad you call a girlfriend. And by the way, could you mention to her that she needs to lose a little weight and do something about her hair? And she could do it too if she would just use these diet pills and this hair gel. And by the way, both of you guys should probably be smoking these cigarettes and drinking this beer. Then you'd be really cool. Although your teeth are looking a little yellow, but we can fix that if you would just use this tooth whitening shit. And then the hot girls would really do you. And by the way, are you happy with your penis size? If you are, that's cool. A lot of guys are happy with fun size. Is that what you call that, fun size? A lot of girls like that. I mean, I haven't met any, but I bet there are some. But if you change your mind, all you'd have to do is take a couple of these babies, and soon you would have to call up guys to help you carry your junk around like a train on a wedding dress. But how are you gonna call your junk carriers with that crappy phone you got there? You should be using this phone with the swipey bullshit technology that makes other people feel like they're better than you just by owning this phone. And they are better than you. Oh my God, all this stuff you need and don't have is making me anxious. Is it making you anxious? Is it? Are you anxious now? Are you? Well, then all you'd have to do is take a couple of these, and in 2 weeks' time, you would feel better than anything. Plus, bonus side effect, these pills also make your ass hair shiny and more manageable with extra bounce. Anyway, I gotta go, because your girlfriend just decided she looks pretty good in a vintage dress, and I gotta turn that around quick before she stops taking the Ambien Prozac cocktail I gave her, and then she'll stop shopping continuously in order to fill the void created by self-hatred, created by me. Would you hang out with that guy?
Hello and welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host for today, Jim Phillips, or James Phillips from TZM Education and the UK chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement. So I have a few things lined up for you today, but first of all, just going to start with a little bit of news. Peter Joseph's third episode of Culture in Decline, CVD, which stands for Consumption Vanity Disorder, is now out. It's a really funny expose and very informative expose of materialism and materialist culture, something I briefly touched on in my lecture in Vancouver. That's why we had that little clip from comedian Lee Camp at the beginning of today's show. I thought that was one of the highlights of the show. Really, really funny dig to the ribs of people who find their self-worth in attributing it to external factors such as appearances and extrinsic motivations, how people look at you, rather than intrinsic motivations that have flow, things like music, art, science, research, education, these sorts of pursuits that come from the desire to meet one's own intrinsic interests, rather than meet up to the expectations of what everyone else expects you to look like, say, do, feel, see, so that you can be an obedient consumer. Okay, in other news, the Zeitgeist Movement orientation is out, the first part of it. I have to confess, I've been a very naughty boy and I haven't read it yet because I haven't had time. I wanted to get this show out and then I'm going to get straight on with giving it a read. I'm looking forward to that. So I strongly recommend everybody else does the same. So in keeping with the introduction of this show and the consumption vanity disorder that plagues our social system, I'm going to turn my attention to the highlight of the consumption calendar, otherwise known as an event called Christmas. Anyone who listened to my last radio broadcast will know about the project The First Christmas, so I won't go into too much detail about it on this show, but just an extremely brief description. It is a Facebook visual campaign by which you join the project on Facebook. You take a picture badge, which is a golden C with a Christmas hat on it, and add it to your profile picture, which indicates that this year you would rather your friends and family give what they would have spent on you at Christmas to a charity of your choice instead, or of theirs, whichever you'd prefer. And it's a very simple idea that anybody from any background or walk of life, any religious persuasion, social disposition, political agenda, can come around to basically voice their disdain for what has essentially become a consumption vanity festival once a year, when its agenda was always supposed to be about thinking of those less fortunate than yourself, or at least that's what it was purporting to be. So it's a very simple idea that anybody can get involved with. It doesn't necessarily have the attachment of the Zeitgeist Movement to the project, and that's a good thing, because some people don't agree with us, some people get scared off by our ideas or what have you, but that's what's great about this project, is that it is spreading the sorts of values we would like to see in the world, where people are taking more care for their fellow human beings and are seeing that a gift given on their behalf to something they care deeply about, or an issue they care about, is actually still a gift to you as an individual. And when people start to see that mentality and see that mentality grow out there, they'll be more inclined to relinquish their previous selfish and contrived values and take on board ones that are more rewarding, shall we say, such as empathy. So that's the great nature of this, that anybody can get involved in it, and any Zeitgeist Movement member who holds these sorts of values will undoubtedly see the merits in such a project and such an idea, even though, of course, as a movement, we don't advocate charity as a method of meaningfully solving the world's problems as they stand. They are, of course, symptoms of the social disorder that the Zeitgeist Movement talks about. But you know what? Sitting back and giving the middle finger to the festival and saying, that's it, I'm not having anything to do with it, is not particularly the most effective approach, in my opinion. All that will do is just give ammunition to those who would want to call you Scrooge. Far better, I would argue, to hijack the values that many purport Christmas to be about and use them against it as a weapon, almost. So I guess a decent analogy would be, instead of going up against this huge juggernaut of a boat called Christmas in your tiny little dinghy, why don't you actually just jump aboard the boat, say, hey guys, you know what you say this Christmas thing should be about? Yep, well, shall we just steer the boat in that direction? Yep, sounds okay, good, right, fine. It sounds like a much easier and more effective route to take, considering. And I can see evidence of this already working in my own family, who are starting to discuss more creative ways of doing Christmas for our very large and extended family. And I think part of that's to do with the fact that it's very difficult to go up to someone and say to them, so what would you like for Christmas? And then they turn around and say, well, I don't want anything for myself, but could you please take the money you were going to spend on me and give it to a charity of my choice instead? And just briefly here, I want to mention the charity I've chosen for this Christmas, because I think it's quite interesting, and it has a little tie into the Zeitgeist Movement, actually, with regards to the humane application of technology to solve human problems. My charity of choice is actually some work being done by a gentleman called Masood Hassani, who has a design that he calls the Mine Cafon. What the Mine Cafon is a landmine clearing device, and a much, much cheaper one than many of the ones that are out there currently. This design is basically a metal ball that you screw broom handles into, or what look like broom handles, and on the end of them you stick rubber feet, and the wind pushes this ball across desert areas where landmine sites are and blows them up, basically. But it only ever blows out a couple of the spikes at a time, so by the time it eventually comes back off the landmine site, you screw back in the poles with the feet on the end, and then you send it back again over the landmine area. And it's got a little GPS tracking system in it that tells you exactly what area it's actually been over. And Masood is trying to get funding for his project. I think it's a very valuable project. He did a TED talk on it recently that you can take a look at, or you can go to his website, which is masoodhassani.blogspot.co.uk. Masood is MASSOUD and then HASSANI. So yeah, if you want to check that out, it's really, really impressive. And of course, this is technology humanely applied, which I know we're all fans of out there in the Zeitgeist Movement. So after saying, yeah, I'd rather help people who are having their legs blown off at Christmas, it becomes rather difficult for the other person to ask for that Xbox 360 or a dildo that plays "O Come All Ye Faithful" now, isn't it? Kudos to George Carlin for that one. So I guess essentially what you're doing is shaming people through empathy. I know that shame is one of the lead causes of violence in the world, but you'd like to hope that they wouldn't punch your lights out under the mistletoe and accuse you of being a sanctimonious posturer now, wouldn't you? Although, actually, someone did accuse me of being a sanctimonious posturer, to which my response was, well, if giving to those less fortunate than myself at a time when that's what the whole point of the festival is supposed to be about makes me a sanctimonious posturer, then I guess I'll just have to be a sanctimonious posturer. And I did also mention that it's not compulsory, but alas, people don't like to have these values challenged. It questions the very core of their identity in some cases. So how's it gone so far? Well, hundreds of people have joined the various pages on Facebook. That's the event page and the main page, as well as versions of the page set up in other languages. So it's been really, really promising to see everybody jump on board this. So a massive, massive thank you to all of you who have. But to those who haven't, please do jump onto www.facebook.com/thefirstchristmas and help us out with this campaign. When you've jumped on board, please do go to the event page and add people to that through your friends list. Like the page, share it with your friends, do anything you can to promote it. If we all see this as our little project collectively, then we might be able to really, really bring round a big chunk of our culture towards a train of thought that's much more empathic and caring towards their fellow human beings rather than contrived and selfish and self-orientated, as unfortunately many aspects of our culture currently are. There is also an afterthought I had with regards to this project of the need for perhaps a widget of some kind to keep tally of how much people have raised at Christmas through their friends and family and through the First Christmas project. I think it would be really beneficial to have something like that on the page where people could go back after Christmas and just type in what they raised, what cause it was for perhaps, so that people can come back and see that by this collective effort we are making a difference. And I think that that's something I would like to look into. So if anybody knows how to set up something like that out there, please do get in touch with me through the TZM Education website, which is www.tzmeducation.org. That's something I would be interested in doing. But if this doesn't happen this year, it's not the end of the world. I'm not naive enough to think that it was going to change the whole values of Christmas in one shot. So I'm sure it will probably need to come back next year so that people can start to understand that if they do want this festival to continue on a finite planet, then it might need to change a few of its value orientations, to say the least. So I think that that's more than enough of an update on the First Christmas project for now. So what's in store for you next on today's show? Well, there's been a lecture I've wanted to include in one of my shows for a while from US coordinator Jen Wilding, which she gave at Z-Day 2012 in Los Angeles, which was titled A Practical Strategy for Communicating RBE Concepts. Basically a rundown of how to effectively communicate these ideas to the general public, which has always stuck in my head because it really does reinforce the need for us to understand the science of communication and the need for that communication to be clear, and the need to look for extensional values and extensional points of view in trying to get these ideas across, of which there are many, which Jen will point out in her talk. It is, of course, critical to remember that whilst we may know that this is a sound direction in which society could head, and we may have evidence to back up our points, the fact is that if we can't communicate with other people effectively, know the battles that are worth fighting, so to speak, or at least how to go about fighting them or how to make our point effectively, then all of the wonderful information we possess and all the great ideas we have won't actually amount to anything. So without further ado, here's Jen Wilding from Z-Day 2012 in Los Angeles.
Hi. Okay. By a quick show of hands, how many people in this room have introduced somebody to the concept of a resource-based economic model, and as a result, you received a response of sincere gratitude from the person? You were told, "Thank you for sharing this with me." Okay, good. Well, I don't know how many of you have actually shared. How many of you have shared this with other people? Okay, so not everyone has received that response, but hopefully I'm going to help you out with that. So now, how many people may have received feedback at all similar to this note of gratitude I'm going to read to you? I just want to thank you for posting the Facebook status, "Wake up, you ignorant sheeples, before we all die," followed by 11 exclamation points, because if you hadn't done that, myself, my wife, and 2 children might not have watched the 14 YouTube links you posted in the 2 hours following that, and thus discovered this new resource-based economic paradigm, information that has been life-changing for us. I shudder to think that if your status had been typed in lowercase letters instead of all caps, we might still be in the dark today about solutions that offer encouraging possibilities to all mankind. So I don't think any of you identify with that. Fortunately, and this is not a real post, but unfortunately, it was modeled after some people's real posts. No one here, I'm sure. And I bring this up as an extreme example of how our strategy for communicating information has a direct impact on whether or not someone is open to considering the information you have to offer. And I bring this up as an extreme example to illustrate that in particular. And even though this is nothing new, that the way you communicate makes a difference, as a US coordinator, one of the most frequent questions I am asked by people is, how do I communicate this information in a way that my friends and relatives and coworkers will be more likely to receive it? So I've been invited to offer some advice to perhaps optimize your communication strategy, which I offer to you in 6 parts. Part 1 is adjusting your expectations. So when trying to contribute to an evolution, you have to consider a major component that has been prevalent in our own existing evolution up until now. And that is that a component that humans have a history of exhibiting symptoms of, and that is neophobia. Actually, not this kind, a different kind. And by that, I mean the fear of new things or experiences. And as a related condition, there's a related condition also called the status quo bias, which is very similar to that. And so I'm sure you have experience with people who are exhibiting both neophobia and perhaps a status quo bias. So neophobia, fear of new things or experiences; status quo bias, a cognitive bias for the status quo. In other words, people tend not to change an already established behavior. They tend to go with default programming. And traditionally, this fear of new things is somewhat indigenous to our human limbic system, which is related to our emotion and memory mind, and has been helpful in keeping us in an evolutionary sense from an early demise as a result of eating unfamiliar berries that might be poisonous. Yet, as we're discovering, it has been decidedly unhelpful when needing to update crippled socioeconomic systems. And so here are some potential causes of neophobia and status quo bias: risk aversion, regret avoidance, transactional costs, and psychological commitment or learning curve. Here's an example of neophobia at its finest in history. This is from an article called Enhancing Humanity, written by Professor Raymond Tallis. Quote, "In Victorian times, it was anticipated that going through a dark tunnel in a train at high speed, 30 miles per hour, would be such a shocking experience that people would come out the other side irreversibly damaged." So this was an actual fear of travel by rail. So this is what you're working with. And so when I say adjust your expectation, just know that it's natural part of humans, a part of our evolution, even, to be skeptical of new things, because they may not be good for us. Knowing this challenge, how can we enhance our communication strategy to be more effective? And to answer this question, we can look to other information about human behavior for clues. So I'm going to ask you this. Can you guess the most addictive human behavior? No, it's not cigarette smoking. It's not eating sweets, although breathing's a good one. I don't think it made the list. Drinking coffee? No. It came close. We know Char's vote. Being right. Being right. Okay, so there was no formal study per se. It was more of an informal survey of a few close friends. But I think the results have merit in this conversation. And I'll actually dare you to prove me wrong. So stay with me, because this is leading us into part 2, which is... Yes, I need to keep hitting the right side of it. Part 2 is adopt the quality of brilliant. Didn't you know you could do this? As many of you know, this is something that is desirable, adopting the quality of brilliant. And so let's think about what that's actually comprised of. Maybe this is something you've heard or perhaps said about someone, an author or a speaker that you have thought was brilliant. This guy or gal is saying some of the same things I've been telling people for years. He or she puts it all together so well. He or she is therefore brilliant. Do you see the connection? Right? So if you were to go to that in your mind, you might have even said that about Peter Joseph, as I know many of you here are perhaps here as a result of watching his movies. I hear this said about him all the time. I had this thought about him at the time. So it comes down to this. It really feels good to be right, and we tend to listen to people who make us right, basically, who validate an aspect of our existing view of the world. So I want to talk about belief systems, our view of the world, belief systems as a worldview. And this is sort of a map, and note, the map is not the territory. Famously, since we're born, we begin developing our worldview, how the world works, what our relationships to the world is. And in order for us to first learn something new, we need to have some orientation of the new idea to our current worldview or reference. A wise friend once told me that he'd heard that the ultimate sign of intelligence in a person was having the ability to honestly try on another person's worldview, a different, opposing view, temporarily, without any fear of an obligation to take it on as his own. So just trying it on and seeing how that person thinks. So I want you to imagine how the effort of trying on the worldview of others can contribute to your communication. So how can you adopt this quality of brilliance? Well, you can set out to make someone right instead of make them wrong, and try to start out with agreement. And you do this by finding and acknowledging shared values within their existing worldview. And why does this work? Because it gives us those good feelings. It gives that person a sense of, wow, this person does have some good points on this particular aspect. Some keys to natural brilliance are that you really need to be a good listener in a conversation with someone so that you can learn what their worldview is, find out what's important to them. And you want to find areas of authentic agreement and then contribute authentic agreement to the conversation. And basically, I mean, that authentic piece of it's important because I know when somebody's being fake with me just as much as I'm sure you do. If somebody's just trying to be manipulative, and there's no need to in this case. We're talking about things that people have shared values in regard to, there is common ground to be found. So all you have to do is find where the authentic common ground is. So I want to review some shared values that you're going to find. This is in a resource-based economic model, what we're advocating, what we desire, and also if you listen to a lot of other people and what they're looking for, it's basically the same thing in one form or another, and if not all of these things, some of these things. So human equality, efficiency or sustainability, scientific proof or evidence, health and well-being, and freedom for personal contribution. And let's see, just as a reminder, a refresher, let's quickly review the characteristics of a resource-based economic model, which are no money or market system, the automation of labor, technological unification of Earth via a systems approach, access over property, so basically having access to resources versus having to own them, self-contained or localized city and production systems, and science as the methodology for governance. So that's basically, what you would be leading to in a communication after you start with an agreement from a shared value. And we're going to move to part 3, and then I'm going to sort of give some examples of how all this fits into a conversation. Comparing a resource-based economy concept to an existing or familiar concept. And this is challenging because it is hard to find where in our current system there are things to tap into that people can relate to. So I'll give you a few examples. The reason that the fish or sea animals don't eat each other at the New England Aquarium. And this aquarium is a 4-story coral reef exhibit that includes over 600 sea animals. And I was there visiting a little over a year ago. And a child asked this question of the aquarium staff: why don't the fish and sea animals that would normally be eating each other in the ocean do this in the tank? And how do you maintain your stock for this? Or the fish? Answer was that the reason is they have modified their behavior is because the aquarium staff is diligent to ensure that all of the species are well-fed food that they are satisfied with. And since they're already taken care of in this way, there's no need for them to feed on each other. They can now swim side by side without a problem. So do you think fish are smarter than humans would be in a similar scenario? Just something to think about. That was the human nature argument. Or this one. I personally find more freedom in not owning my own shopping cart, than I would trying to lug it to the store with every trip. We can start to realize that we already accept sharing property as a freedom in certain present-day contexts. So that makes it easier to consider that an idea could be expanded upon with an improved outcome. So then you might think, well, are there other ways in which this might be useful, that we would be sharing resources where we need them and not needing to own them? Not, that there's actually more freedom in that concept. And we embrace that. I don't know anybody that would say, no, I have to have my own shopping cart. This is ridiculous. So food for thought. Also, children offer a great example of how humans might behave when they aren't required to have jobs. Notice they don't usually have much paperwork represented in their play. And there was probably no call to the insurance company to check coverage details. We can learn so much from little people. But they do play to be helpful with each other, and it is a sense of work, except it's work that they're enjoying. They would love to be doing that for real. It's an adult thing to do. But it's not something, their kids they're playing. I don't know how many people's kids just sit around and watch football all day long, and they never leave the house at this age, although maybe that would be more convenient for some parents. no, they're pretty active. So I think they offer a good example when people say, but, isn't everybody going to be lazy if there aren't any jobs? Part 4 is to make use of the Socratic method, aka, otherwise known as, ask questions, and really listen for the answers. Asking questions encourages critical thinking on the part of both parties. But in order to really be effective, you need to actively listen for the answers to questions and then formulate a new response based on those answers instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. So in order to kind of illustrate these, I'm going to give you some examples of communication exchanges based on real things that have come up of people who, after you sort of introduce the concept of a resource-based economy, or maybe they just watched one of Peter's films, they have different kinds of reactions to them, so I'll give you some examples. Won't everyone be just as lazy in a resource-based economy? So you ask yourself, what are the shared values or concerns behind this response? And that's really what you want to look for. Human equality. It would be unfair for some people to be doing work or not contributing and just benefiting. I think that's kind of the view, so that human equality. And also that plays into sustainability. If everybody was just lazy in an RBE, what would really get done? What would really happen? Would that be any place I'd want to live? And of course, you here are people that already get this, but this is just trying to tap into how you might respond to this in a way that's tapping into those shared values. So you might, again, I suggest a response that includes the shared value acknowledged and starting with agreement. I agree, in order for this new system to sustain itself, you can't have one group benefiting over another group. It has to be a fair system where everyone is reaping equal benefits. And what I actually like about an RBE model is that the issue of equality is addressed in the design. The idea is to reduce human labor using an efficient system of design and technology so that the necessary jobs that no one enjoys become completely automated. And this leaves jobs that people enjoy, like teaching, creating art, creating music, developing technology, gardening, work that most would not require a rigid, stressful schedule, or that could be shared in shifts, perhaps, with others to allow for family and social time. And then I would pose a question. Do you feel that in that scenario, people would still choose to lay around instead of making a pleasurable contribution? So that's just one example of how to approach that particular person to open up the conversation. Another one is, but technology hasn't improved life, it's made things worse. So I like to think of what might be the shared concerns or values behind this kind of a response. Well-being, because we know that technology today replaces jobs, which are tied to income, which causes people to have a lower standard of living. So there is a concern for well-being underlying that statement. And making up personal contribution. Also, it may be when they say it's made things worse, the evils that technology is used for, such as in warfare. So a response might be, I agree, there's a lot of technology in existence today that does more harm than good. Military weapons are a prime example, in addition to machines stealing jobs from humans and thus taking away needed income. However, in a resource-based economic model, the need for weapons to secure land or resources becomes obsolete. Technology for these purposes would be obsolete. And since humans would no longer need to work to earn money in order to live comfortably, I think in those circumstances, we'd welcome the machines to do the labor that we don't enjoy or that isn't safe. And then imagine what good things could be done by machines if no money, or money wasn't in existence, or money is no object. Also, to give a current example, if you're tying it into an example of where technology can be used for really amazing things, technicians are already in the process of perfecting technology that allows for the printing of vital human organs, such as kidneys. And that's just one example. But, you know, it took a tremendous advancement to get there in technology. So do we really want to all lump it into evil and bad? So these are some things that you can bring up in that conversation. As a Christian, I think we need to take into account God's will as a response. So the shared values or concepts behind this response. Could be human equality, could be well-being. As you're talking to the person, you can kind of get what that means to them. And so here's one way that you might approach it. Jesus is a great example of an advocate for a resource-based model, based economic model per scriptures. So, for example, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. Matthew 25:35. Note that he doesn't say you gave me a great competitive discount on these things. So it is within. He also multiplied the fishes and the loaves at that one event, which sort of makes me think he'd dig the whole post-scarcity aspect of it, eliminating poverty and allowing multitudes of people to have free access to food, shelter, and healthcare. In fact, the only time he really gets angry that I recall is when he kicks the money changers out of the temple. And then you pose a question, so what do you think he would say about it in that framework? And I think you'd be surprised that they may be a little bit more open to further discussion on it. Next. We need to embrace a true free market and individual sovereignty, and things will improve if we do this. So some shared values and concerns behind this response. If someone is saying, no, we really need to see what the true market has to offer and focus on that. This is more the anarcho-capitalist or libertarian response. And I know it well, because I used to be in that vein. Human equality is definitely in there as an underlying attribute that they're seeking. Freedom of personal contribution is definitely something that they're seeking in this response, and it's something that is a shared value of a resource-based economy. Response. I also greatly value individual freedom and also agree that a well-designed system will negate the need for laws that unnecessarily restrict freedom. These are actually among the very reasons I support moving to a global resource-based economic model. We are technically capable of moving to a system that would remove the reward for crime and bump everyone up to a high quality of living, allowing for more freedom than most have in a monetary system, where we have to have money in order to make money, and we become enslaved to labor through debt to survive. So I'd be thrilled to have only natural laws to answer to and an inherent freedom to pursue my passions in tandem with contributing to an overall healthy environment. So those values are definitely there and represented. The very thing that they are concerned about is acknowledged in the design of what we advocate. Okay, here's the other piece of it. You have to know when to walk away. Walk away when the person, and this is what they look like to us when they're acting this way anyway, I think, is not asking any questions, they're just making statements. They're asking questions, but they don't appear interested in sincere responses. In other words, they really aren't interested in what you have to say, or they're attempting to insult you. There's no need to continue the conversation at that point. We're not trying to be evangelists. In fact, basically, the best that you can do with what we're trying to do as a movement is to sow seeds. And basically, as you're sowing seeds, and all that is just introducing it, not even seeking agreement from that person, but just getting the information to them, having them think about it for a second or two. And as biosocial pressures rise and more people look for a different solution, a more comprehensive solution to today's problems, interest in this train of thought is likely to grow and grow. In part 6, always maintain a sense of humor. So I wanted to end on this example because it's one that always gives me a chuckle. I can't support this RBE model until I see the hard evidence that it works. Where are the peer-reviewed papers? I've actually gotten this one. And I know a few other people that have. So the shared values or concerns behind this response seems to be pretty obvious. The scientific proof. So in response, I may say, I am also a huge fan of the scientific method. In fact, if you were to create a movement advocating a socioeconomic paradigm where the scientific method is the very methodology that determines what ideas and innovations are implemented immediately to produce the desired outcome, and which ones go back to the drawing board for reworking and revision, what might you call that socioeconomic movement? We happen to call it the Zeitgeist Movement. Yeah. Thank you.
Hope you all enjoyed that talk, guys. I think it contains some really useful information that we need to make sure that we're aware of when we're communicating these ideas to the general public, family, friends, etc. Next up on today's show is a continuation of the audiobook series for The First Civilization by Jas Garcher. Hopefully you will have heard the previous readings from this book in my prior radio shows, but by all means go back to the archives on TZM Global Radio and have a listen to those. If you're near a laptop and want to read along with James, then please feel free to do so. If you just type The First Civilization Jas Garcher into Google, it should get you through to a link to the book, which is available on the Zeitgeist Movement's website in the blog section. So I'd finished off on the last show just prior to the next section on the manufacturing of goods, so I'm going to pick it up from there on page 15. Manufacturing of goods. Here's where things start to get really interesting. The primary goal of an RBE is to provide all the necessary goods and services a person needs to have a happy, healthy, productive life. But how would that be possible? In a word, automation. Automation is the process of replacing human labour with machines that perform the same task. Let's see how automation would be applied to make the entire labour-based manufacturing process of today obsolete. We'll start by talking about a specific kind of technology that really is the key to the entire manufacturing process in an RBE. Additive manufacturing. Additive manufacturing, more commonly known as 3D printing, is a process whereby an entire object is constructed by being built up layer by layer until a complete product is created. In the same way that two-dimensional printers place a layer of ink onto paper in order to create a 2D image, 3D printers place layers of material atop one another in an automatic fashion until a real physical object is created from a computer model. What's more, the objects need not be simple shapes. Complicated geometries and moving parts are possible to print using a variety of different materials. This is of critical importance because it means that we would no longer need to rely on traditional mass production techniques where a product is assembled from separate parts. Instead, a product is built together in one piece, allowing materials to be combined and integrated in ways that are simply not possible using traditional manufacturing. Smaller 3D printers generally create objects using thermoplastics, which are biodegradable plastics derived from plant materials such as cornstarch. Large-scale 3D printing is known as contour crafting, and using this technique it is possible to construct a multi-bedroom concrete house with plumbing and electronics completely integrated in a single day without the need for any human labour. This construction method also produces far less waste than hobbling together a house out of wood and bricks, in addition to producing houses that are much more resistant to extreme weather such as earthquakes and floods. Using additive manufacturing, all it would take to build virtually any object from scratch is a computer model and some imagination. The fact that most consumer 3D printing would be done using thermoplastics would also result in an unprecedented level of efficiency. Since thermoplastics are made from plant material, we would no longer require fossil fuels to make plastics. Instead, we would literally be able to grow our plastics in the aforementioned vertical farms. Some of the produce being grown would be earmarked for the making of thermoplastics. And since these plastics are biodegradable, no plastic object would ever need to be thrown away. Instead, older plastic goods could be sent back to the vertical farms where they would be composted. The nutrients could then be fed back into the plants that would become the thermoplastics of tomorrow, thereby allowing us to exercise an extremely efficient form of recycling. The types of landfills and dumping sites which are common today would become literally unthinkable in an RBE. Now that we understand a bit more about our method, we can start discussing the actual process of manufacturing goods. One major difference between an RBE and today's economic systems is that we would no longer be forced to create less than optimal goods in order to maintain cost efficiency. In other words, in an RBE, every item created would be of the absolute best quality that is physically possible. As of today, many of us must buy cheaper products because we cannot afford to buy the best of everything. Likewise, manufacturers are forced to create products of lower quality because they cannot afford to construct everything in the best possible way. This results in us constantly needing to replace worn-out clothing, have our automobiles repaired, and throw out broken products which were never built to last very long in the first place. The need for cost efficiency results in a wasting of resources, energy, and time, and is absolutely unacceptable. So in an RBE, we would go with the method of maximum efficiency and minimum waste, making every product as stable and long-lasting as possible. Likewise, all electronic products must be made to be as easily upgradable as possible. This way, we wouldn't need to throw out an old computer just because newer computers are faster. Instead, we would constantly upgrade our electronics in order to ensure that they are always functioning as well as they possibly can. In that same vein, absolutely every product that cannot be continually upgraded must be recyclable or biodegradable. There is simply no purpose in creating excess waste if we can avoid it. Producing products in this manner does seem to result in one potential drawback at first: standardization. If we are creating every product in the best possible way every time, then wouldn't that make every product identical? For example, wouldn't every car look the same? Wouldn't every t-shirt and computer look like every other t-shirt and computer? This might lead some people to worry that there would be a huge reduction in individuality and personal expression. Fortunately, there is a very simple solution to this problem: customization. Since every product is created from scratch, the potential for customization is far greater than what is possible today. The best example to show this is the manufacturing of clothing. People often use the clothing they wear in order to display their individuality, despite the fact that virtually everything we wear was designed by someone else. Couple this in with the fact that much of what people wear is influenced by trends in the fashion industry, and we quickly realize that there is very little true individuality being expressed through outward appearances today. Let's pretend I'm living in an RBE and I want to order a t-shirt. We'll talk more about how products would be distributed shortly. I would sit at my computer and bring up the standard t-shirt model. I would then be able to customize the color, the shape, the size, the design, and make any other superficial adjustments I felt like making. The product I receive would still be as durable and long-lasting as the standard t-shirt model, and it would also be a personal expression of my individuality. That is why in an RBE, any personal goods available would be both standardized and customizable. For public use goods, however, which we'll talk about soon, there would not be any real need for this kind of customization. These types of goods would be essentially identical in order to minimize the expenditure of resources on items that have no need for superficiality. So in an RBE, all products would be created from scratch without the need for human labour, with the highest quality possible, recyclable or biodegradable wherever possible, and standardised, universally upgradable for electronics, and completely customisable for personal goods such as clothing. This would result in a manufacturing system that is far less wasteful, far more efficient, and far more personalised than anything seen today. However, we've only covered one half of the equation, goods. Now let's talk about how services would look in an RBE. Services. It takes more than just material goods to run a society. Continuing with our philosophy of freeing humans from labour whenever possible, nearly all services would also be automated. This might sound like an impossible task at first, but we have to keep in mind that many of the services which exist today would not exist in an RBE. Any occupations having to do with finance, law, advertising, business or politics would no longer be around, since there would no longer be any need for them. If you're confused by that last sentence, just wait a few more paragraphs. By the end of this chapter, all will be explained. We just need to cover a few more things first. So what services would still exist in an RBE? We would still need medical services, an educational system, a research sector, an arts community, and, well, that's pretty much it. Less critical services such as automated restaurants and food vendors would still exist in order to give people social hubs in which to gather and eat together, since social interaction is a critical need for producing healthy humans. In fact, automated restaurants and robotic chefs exist today, and so automation would likely become a staple of food preparation in an RBE, whether at home or in public places. Now let's talk a bit more about each of the major kinds of services and how they would operate. As of today, it is unlikely that medical services could be entirely automated, but it would still be possible to drastically reduce the workload of medical practitioners by ensuring that society as a whole is much more physically healthy than it is today. In addition to the removal of unhealthy polluting energy sources, an organic diet tends to create organisms that are more resilient to disease. By having education freely available to all people, it's likely that people would be more knowledgeable about maintaining their own health. In addition, each human would be more capable of monitoring their own health thanks to inventions like the mirror, which will be able to tell your heart rate, blood pressure, blood oxygen levels, and respiratory health just by standing in front of it. The logic is quite straightforward. By creating a society where people are much less likely to get sick, we would reduce the workload for medical practitioners. That being said, the idea of increasing the automation of medical services is not as far-fetched as one might think. Currently, needle-bearing robots are able to give precise injections. Miniaturized swimming and crawling robots are able to move through our body in order to monitor our health from the inside. Robotic surgeons are able to perform invasive surgeries with more accuracy and precision than is physically possible for a human surgeon. In an RBE, we would therefore maximize the use of automated robotic medicine in order to minimize the workload for human doctors further, which would be possible without the constant need to worry about how much medical equipment costs money-wise. Humans would still probably be needed for specialized cases and for general operation of the medical robots, but the need for human intervention would continually decrease as technology improved and could theoretically become unnecessary in the future. Already it is possible for human doctors to act through fully articulated robot avatars, which allow a doctor to interact with a patient without being present in the same room or country. So during the early stages of an RBE, automated robots would mostly take the role of medical assistants and nurses, performing basic tasks such as patient monitoring and uncomplicated diagnosis, as well as doing the dirty work of injections and surgery. Meanwhile, human doctors would be free to spend more time on special or rare cases, on direct patient interaction, or on medical research. This would prevent any one doctor from being spread too thin among a large number of patients, or from becoming overworked or overstressed, all of which are common issues for medical practitioners today. Over time, more and more of the tasks performed by human medical practitioners would be handed off to automated machines, and humans would be completely relegated to the tasks of research and very special cases. Of course, human medical practitioners could not exist unless there was a comprehensive educational system in place. Education in an RBE would look very different from today's competition-based educational systems, where students are pitted against each other in a struggle for grades and popularity that generally results in a universally poor experience for virtually all students. I am personally amazed at the ability of traditional schools to turn even the most interesting of subjects into mind-numbingly boring drivel that must be regurgitated onto a test in order to receive an arbitrary number or letter that supposedly represents how learned an individual is. RBE education would follow a model similar to Montessori educational systems. In brief, Montessori schools encourage independent learning through play and child-on-child interaction. Children of multiple ages are grouped together rather than isolated so that younger children can learn from older ones, while older children reinforce their learning in a practical way by teaching the younger children. Rather than having teachers play the role of dictators and drill sergeants, teachers act simply as guides. They are available for guidance when the child requires it, but otherwise they are simply there to ensure that everything is running smoothly with minimum interference. These types of educational systems have been proven to be just as effective, and sometimes more so, than traditional schooling when it comes to concrete learning, in addition to producing humans with superior social development. It is this latter quality of Montessori-style schools which make them critical for the success of an RBE. Citizens of an RBE would be more cooperative, less antagonistic, more sociable, less aggressive, and generally have superior psychosocial development compared to those of us who are forced into the incredibly flawed educational systems of today. So what would education in an automated society look like? Here is a potential example of one based on the Montessori system. I should stress once again that this is simply an example of a system and is not necessarily a prediction of what the educational system would actually be. Early childhood development would be largely in the hands of the parents and the community, much as it is today. The main responsibility of the parent would be to teach the child basic skills such as reading, writing, and computer interaction so that the child would be prepared for school. Rather than forcing a child into school at a certain age, the child would be free to visit an educational centre whenever they felt ready. During the early stages of education, children would all share a play area filled with toys and other objects such as basic art supplies that encourage cognitive development in the very young. The area would also be filled with computers, all of which would allow them to access basic lessons in such subjects as mathematics, natural science, art, literature, and history. This process would not require a teacher or parent to be present, since the children would learn from each other, and the computer database would fill the role of the teacher guide. Despite this, I think it is likely that many parents would jump at the opportunity to be directly involved in their child's learning, and so would choose to be present. Without being forced into jobs, parents would be free to spend as much time with their children as they wanted, and could be more intimately involved in their child's educational process. Each child would be required to pass a basic test designed to evaluate their ability in all of the basic knowledge areas before advancing to the general education program. In this next step, people of all ages, from elementary-aged children to adults and seniors, would all share the same learning areas. The areas would be similar to the early childhood ones, but with more complex objects available for play, as well as materials for more complex artistic expression, musical instruments, painting supplies, etc., and basic scientific experimentation. The computers present would be connected to the global knowledge database. This would be a wiki-style encyclopedia created in an open-sourced fashion where anyone can contribute knowledge. It would be much like the online encyclopedias of today, but ideally bigger, better sourced, and created with the full aid of powerful computers and artificial intelligence, instead of relying on whatever computing power can be bought with donations. This would vastly increase the potential of this already powerful idea. And of course the internet, as we know it today, would still be present. In this way, learners of all ages and experience levels would be free to learn about whichever subjects they were interested in at whatever rate they were comfortable with. This would encourage them to begin to hone in on their particular subjects of interests very quickly, while maintaining some interest in many other fields as well. Like modern textbooks, the database would also contain practical problem-solving modules designed to develop the skill of the learner in each subject. children and adults would simultaneously learn from each other and the knowledge database, and would have access to knowledge ranging from the most basic to the most advanced in every subject. There would be no limitations based on age. A very dedicated 13-year-old teaching a 31-year-old about quantum physics would not be out of the ordinary. Individuals who are very knowledgeable in certain areas, as determined by their ability to pass problem-solving modules of high complexity, would be encouraged to hold lectures and discussion groups, as well as contribute more problem-solving questions to the knowledge database. In this way, the educational system would continually grow as our species grows, and since education is freely available to everyone, it is likely that most people would never stop learning, constantly seeking new knowledge throughout their lives, whenever the interest hit them. In addition, as artificial intelligence becomes more powerful, it would be possible for the database to learn how each individual learns, and therefore customize the educational experience to be specific and optimized for each person. The ultimate purpose of the education system would be to produce happy, cooperative, knowledgeable, socially well-adjusted humans which are able to take on the challenges of advancing society, rather than simply maintaining it. There is no force that serves the advancement of society in practical terms more than scientific and technological research. Therefore, it would be absolutely necessary for an RBE to have a strong focus on research. Once again, there would be no limitations based on age. Anyone with sufficient knowledge in the requisite area would be free and encouraged to contribute to research in whatever way they could. Perhaps the greatest difference between research today and in an RBE would be due to the lack of a monetary system. Speaking from my own personal experience in medical research, the single greatest hindrance to scientific progress is money. Simply put, scientific research is expensive. Therefore, most scientists must take weeks or even months out of every year begging granting agencies for money, many of whom will not provide it unless there is a chance that profit can be made from the research. Perhaps the best example of this is the current crisis involving dichloroacetate, DCA for short, which is a highly promising cancer treatment that could bring us one step closer to curing cancer. However, researchers are unable to obtain funding due to the fact that DCA cannot be patented by any drug companies. This means that no one would be able to make money from its sale, and thus cancer remains uncured. However, in an RBE, there would be no need to waste time and energy on the often fruitless quest for funding, and resources would not be held back due to lack of profitability. Therefore, scientific research would accelerate far quicker than we see today. When one considers how much progress has been made in scientific and technological research in the last century, even with the hindering drag of the monetary system, we can quickly see that scientific advancement in an RBE would be absolutely astonishing. It is no stretch to say that an RBE would quickly become an extremely technologically advanced society, the likes of which we see in the science fiction of today. Furthermore, there would be no need to wait for the market to accept new technologies. Anything that is of practical use and has been tested for safety would be implemented as soon as possible for the benefit of society. Implementation would be based on practical usefulness rather than attempts to make money. In addition, research would be aided even more by the global knowledge database. For example, let's say someone is trying to come up with a choice material that possesses certain properties which are required for an experiment. That person would punch these properties into the global database with some kind of designation that is a question of materials. The computer then comes up with a list of as many materials which fit the description as possible, in order of best match to the demand. This is literally exactly what a search engine today does. But this search engine contains, ideally, all of the scientific and technical information in its most up-to-date format at the time. The database must be continually updated when new theories or ideas are taken in favour of older ones, although older ones should never be eradicated completely since there is always a chance that they will be needed again. This process would need to be voluntary at first, but would almost certainly become automated as well eventually. In this way, scientific research would not only accelerate even faster, but the educational system would always be based on the most current state of scientific knowledge. There is more to a society than just scientific progress, however. It is critical that a fully functioning society also provides its citizens with opportunities for personal expression and emotional stimulation, as realized through a vibrant arts community. Once again, without the hindrance of money, art would be able to flourish in ways that would simply not be possible today. Too often, potential artists must put aside their dreams in order to find a job that actually pays well enough for them to survive. Likewise, many artists end up compromising their artistic vision in order to create something that is more commercially viable, selling out. In a society where everyone's basic needs are met without worry, artistic expression of all kinds would likely explode, thus creating a society that is not only scientifically and technologically advanced, but is also rich in artistry and culture of all kinds. Music, poetry, theatre, literature, storytelling, painting, sculpting, philosophy, and all other forms of expression would at last be free to reveal themselves without worrying of censorship or monetary gain. In order to accommodate the artistic community, every city would need to be complete with a number of auditoriums and exhibition halls which could be booked on a first-come, first-served basis. In addition, a variety of museums and galleries would be present in order to display the artistic contributions of the citizens. Like scientific research, artistic contributions would also be continually added to the knowledge database in order to further enhance the educational system by offering access to the artistic works of humanity. So an RBE would not be some bland emotionalist civilization, it would instead be a fusion of science and art, which brings logic and emotion into a harmony never before seen. It would be like a second Renaissance that went on indefinitely. And I'm going to stop reading there. The next radio show I'll pick up from the next section, which is going to be on transportation and infrastructure. So that's just about it for today's TZM Global Radio show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to close today's show with a speech by Alan Watts, who was a philosopher, writer and speaker. And this particular talk he gave is one entitled, "What Would You Do If Money Were of No Object?" And considering some of the themes that I spoke about in the last section there on education and what life would be like in a resource-based economy, that shift in values is what really comes across as being of paramount importance. I think this particular piece of audio sums up this point very well. Thanks for listening, guys. Till next time. See ya.
What makes you itch? What sort of a situation would you like? Let's suppose, I do this often in vocational guidance of students. They come to me and say, well, we're getting out of college and we haven't the faintest idea what we want to do. So I always ask the question, what would you like to do if money were no object? How would you really enjoy spending your life? Well, it's so amazing. As a result of our kind of educational system, crowds of students say, well, we'd like to be painters, we'd like to be poets, we'd like to be writers, but as everybody knows, you can't earn any money that way. Or another person says, well, I'd like to live an out-of-doors life and ride horses. I say, do you want to teach in a riding school? Let's go through with it. What do you want to do? When we finally got down to something which the individual says he really wants to do, I will say to him, you do that. And forget the money. Because if you say that getting the money is the most important thing, you will spend your life completely wasting your time. You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living, that is, to go on doing things you don't like doing, which is stupid. Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And after all, if you do really like what you're doing, it doesn't matter what it is, you can eventually turn it, you could eventually become a master of it. It's the only way to become a master of something, to be really with it. And then you'll be able to get a good fee for whatever it is. So don't worry too much. Somebody's interested in everything. And anything you can be interested in, you'll find others will. But it's absolutely stupid to spend your time doing things you don't like in order to go on spending things you don't like and doing things you don't like, and to teach your children to follow in the same track. See, what we're doing is we're bringing up children and educating them to live the same sort of lives we're living, in order that they may justify themselves and find satisfaction in life by bringing up their children, to bring up their children to do the same thing, so it's all wretch and no vomit. It never gets there. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question: what do I desire?